How did ancient Egyptians set broken bones when no X-ray could reveal the break? Tonight, this calm history for sleep can accompany you while your own room settles into stillness. Picture a warm lamp beside an injured arm. The skin is unbroken, yet the shape beneath it is wrong. One person holds very still. Another waits with both hands near the limb, close enough to examine it but not yet committed to moving it. If the break is hidden, which outward clue deserves trust? If the arm is made straighter, how will it remain that way after those careful hands withdraw? I'm Elias. Subscribe if you enjoy hidden history carried gently through the quiet hours of the night. This is a quiet history for sleep, so you can let the smaller details drift past. We will follow the arm slowly, from the first uncertain look to the linen wrapped around it, and then onward into the old bones that still carry traces of healing. What could strips of linen, pieces of wood, and patient stillness accomplish over many weeks? And when a skeleton looks straight thousands of years later, can it tell us who helped or how? The lamp catches the edge of folded cloth. A narrow support lies on the floor. The injured person watches the practitioner's face while the practitioner watches the arm. The most important work is not begun. There is still a choice: touch or wait, move or support, attempt care or recognize that the injury lies beyond it. You do not need to remember every case or date tonight. Keep this room in mind: one hidden break, one set of visible clues, and one shared responsibility. It must pass safely from hands to materials, and from materials to time. The room we are picturing is representative. It is not one recorded treatment with known names and a known ending. Yet its main parts come from separate surviving traces: an ancient trauma text, excavated supports wrapped around injured limbs, and bones that healed well or badly long before modern imaging existed. Taken together, those traces reveal a practical chain. First, the body was examined from the outside. Next came a judgment about whether the injury seemed treatable. In some surviving arm cases, the limb was brought toward a straighter position. Then external supports and bandaging tried to preserve that position, while the body performed the slow repair hidden beneath the skin. That is our first checkpoint. The ancient practitioner did not need to see through the arm to understand that shape, movement, support, and time belonged to the same problem. The harder task was deciding what each outward sign meant. Anyone who has tried to diagnose a loose hinge, a warped board, or a wheel that no longer runs true will recognize the basic difficulty. The fault may be partly concealed. No single sign is enough. You look at alignment. You compare the damaged side with the sound one. You notice where movement changes, where resistance begins, and whether the whole object still carries its load. The human body is infinitely more complex and deserves far greater care, but the practical habit of mind is familiar. Several clues must agree before action feels justified. The surviving Egyptian text turns that habit into a repeated rhythm. An injury is introduced, and the person is examined. A diagnosis is spoken, and a judgment follows. When treatment is considered possible, a response is described. The sequence is not identical in every case, and the surviving role ends before its journey through the body is complete, but the rhythm is clear enough to feel almost architectural. The roll begins at the head and moves downward. It reaches the neck, the collarbone, the upper arm, the chest, the ribs, the shoulder, and the spine. Then it stops in the middle of a sentence. The lower limb fracture cases that may once have followed are gone from the surviving copy. We are left, quite literally, partway down the body. That missing ending matters. It prevents one papyrus from becoming a complete handbook for every broken bone in ancient Egypt. It also gives the story its quiet shape. We will stay close to what survives, especially the clavicle and humerus, where the words of examination, straightening, bandaging, and support can be compared with physical evidence from other places and times. The first practical reward is already in view. Ancient fracture care was not simply a stick tied to an arm. The support came late in a chain that began with observation and ended in a transfer of responsibility. Before the linen could hold anything, someone had to decide what the arm was telling them. And to understand how that decision became teachable, we need to leave the representative room for a moment and follow the lamplight onto a long roll of papyrus. The Edwin Smith Papyrus is not a modern textbook, though parts of it can feel surprisingly orderly to a modern reader. The surviving roll was copied in the second millennium before our era, around the middle of the 16th century BCE in one commonly used dating. Its language and internal history point toward older composition, but confident claims that one famous figure wrote it in a remote pyramid age have outrun what the document can securely establish. For our purposes, the important thing is not the name of a lost author. It is the arrangement that survives. On the front are 17 columns containing 48 cases of wounds and injuries. The sequence begins high on the body and works downward. Most cases carry recognizable parts, a heading that names the problem, an examination, a statement of diagnosis or prognosis, and, where treatment is attempted, a response. Explanations are sometimes added for difficult words. The result is a written form of disciplined attention. You can imagine a reader moving a finger down the column, not hunting for a grand theory of medicine, but following a case through a set of decisions. What do I see? What happens when the injured area is examined? What should I call this condition? Is it one I will treat, one I will contend with, or one for which action is withheld? There is something restful in that order, even though the subject is injury. Each question has its place. Observation comes before confidence. The judgment is not buried beneath decoration. Treatment, when it appears, follows the stated condition rather than floating free as a universal recipe. The papyrus also preserves the limits of writing. A text can record a procedure without showing how often anyone used it. It can preserve specialist language without telling us how many readers understood every term. It can describe the care of a man with an injury while leaving his occupation, age, household, and final outcome unnamed. A copied roll can carry knowledge across centuries, yet it cannot reveal the ordinary conversation around every treatment room. That makes context more important, not less. In ancient Egypt, written knowledge belonged to particular institutions and literate circles. A place called the House of Life was associated in surviving evidence with the preservation and creation of texts. Titles for healers and physicians also survive, including the term often rendered as soignoir. But those titles do not sort themselves neatly into modern hospital departments. Calling the person in our room an orthopedic surgeon would sound precise, while importing a profession that the evidence does not give us. So we will use quieter words, practitioner, healer, or physician, depending on the source. The person may have learned through reading, apprenticeship, demonstration, remembered cases, or some combination that is no longer visible to us. The papyrus shows that a structured body of injury knowledge existed. It does not supply the attendance list. The 48 cases nevertheless create a useful route. Cases 1 through 27 concern the head. Cases 28 through 33 move through the throat and neck. Cases 34 and 35 concern the clavicle. Cases 36 through 38 concern the humerus. Then come the chest, ribs, shoulder, and spinal column. The final surviving case ends abruptly, as though a teacher had turned away before finishing the line. This downward movement changes how the document feels. It is not a cabinet of disconnected curiosities. The reader travels from one region to the next, meeting injuries of different severity. Within regions, some sequences move from comparatively manageable conditions toward hopeless ones. The organization suggests that the writer cared not only about naming damage, but about sorting it. Sorting is one of the oldest forms of practical intelligence. A carpenter sorts boards by straightness and grain. A sailor sorts changes in wind by what they mean for the next hour. A gardener distinguishes a dry leaf from a dying root. The value lies less in noticing that something is wrong than in deciding which difference changes the next action. That is what the papyrus gives our story. It turns the hidden break into a sequence of observable questions. It also warns us not to make the sequence more complete than it is. Only 3 humorous cases survive. The robe breaks off before the lower limbs. The support instruction itself has a textual puzzle that we will reach later. For now, the written headings have brought us back to the patient. The next checkpoint is not the papyrus as an object, but the body as a field of signs. The practitioner must set the roll aside, look at the injured limb, and decide which outward clues can stand in for the missing image. The injured arm returns to the center of the room. In lamplight, the outer shape may be easier to see from one angle than another. Swelling can blur the lines that normally guide the eye. The shoulder may sit differently. The person may guard the limb without being told, holding it close because movement brings pain. Without an X-ray, diagnosis begins by gathering outward changes. A visible or palpable deformity matters. So does the person's response when the area is touched or when movement is attempted. Comparison matters as well. The uninjured side offers a living reference for length, contour, position, and movement, though bodies are never perfectly symmetrical. The surviving Egyptian cases do not form a modern examination checklist, and we should not use them as one. They do show a practitioner attending to signs that can be observed directly: displacement, abnormal motion, pain, stiffness, and the way one part of the body responds to another. In the spinal cases, movement and loss of movement become especially important. In the upper limb cases, the relation of parts and the possibility of making them straight come forward. The deep skill is convergence rather than one secret sign, because a single clue can mislead. Swelling, for example, can imitate deformity. Pain can limit movement even when a bone remains intact. A joint can be displaced rather than fractured. A break can exist without dramatic external change. Confidence rises when several observations point in the same direction. You may know this feeling from any careful diagnosis. A sound from the engine is useful, but more useful when it changes with speed. A dent patch on a wall means more when it aligns with a pipe above it. A door that binds at the top tells a different story from one that drags across the floor. Each clue has meaning because of its relation to the others. For the ancient practitioner, the body itself was the instrument panel. The eye noticed shape. The hand noticed continuity, resistance, and unwanted movement. The patient's voice and involuntary response added information. Time could add more. Swelling might change. A painful movement might remain impossible. A wound might worsen or settle. The examination was not one frozen instant, even when the papyrus compressed it into a few lines. This is also where the human pressure in our representative room becomes clearest. Every useful clue comes through an injured person. The practitioner cannot treat the arm as a loose beam on a bench. Touch has a cost. Movement has a cost. A person who is frightened or exhausted may not respond in the same way twice. The good examiner needs information, but also restraint. That restraint is visible in the papyrus's repeated judgments. Some injuries are described as treatable. Some are conditions to contend with, a phrase that carries uncertainty and effort. Others are conditions for which treatment is withheld. The classification shows that examination did not automatically lead to intervention. Our first opening loop can now close. How could a break be recognized when it could not be seen? Not by one miraculous touch, and not with the certainty of a modern radiograph. It was recognized through a pattern, altered shape, painful or abnormal movement, the feel of the injured region, comparison with the body around it, and the person's response. The diagnosis remained an informed judgment made at the surface of an invisible problem. This may sound like a limitation, and it was. Yet it also explains why experience mattered so much. A practitioner who had seen many injured shoulders and arms could notice differences that a novice would miss. A written case could preserve the order of attention, while practice supplied the feel that writing struggles to capture. The papyrus preserves a compact world in which words such as examine and say lead toward action. The practitioner observes, then speaks a judgment aloud. Naming the condition gives the next person in the room some sense of what is about to happen. It also places a boundary around the practitioner's own confidence. And that boundary brings us to the next checkpoint. Recognition is only the beginning. Before the arm is straightened or supported, someone must decide whether intervention is likely to help. The condition may demand a difficult contest, or further movement may add harm without reasonable hope. The prognosis formulas in the Edwin Smith Papyrus are among its most memorable features because they make decision visible. One condition is presented as something the practitioner will treat. Another is something to contend with. A third lies beyond treatment. Translators phrase the formulas in slightly different ways, but the underlying distinction remains clear enough. Action was sorted by expected possibility. It is tempting to call this triage, and there is a family resemblance. Yet the modern word carries institutions, emergency systems, and population pressures that do not belong automatically in an ancient room. The safer insight is simpler. The text recognized that injuries differed not only in appearance, but in what care could reasonably accomplish. That is a mature idea in any practical craft. Competence includes knowing when a repair is possible, when it will require uncertain effort, and when intervention may worsen the result. The person who refuses a reckless repair is not necessarily less skilled than the person who attempts a difficult one. Sometimes restraint is the most responsible use of experience. The papyrus's spinal cases make the boundary especially stark. Some patterns of movement and bodily function are associated with treatable judgments. Severe injury with profound loss of movement and function can receive the bleakest verdict. We do not need to linger over the physical details. The important point is that observation changes the category of action. For an upper arm fracture judged treatable, responsibility then shifts. The question is no longer merely what is wrong. It becomes what can be changed from the outside and what must be held while the body changes from within. The practitioner in our representative room has reached that threshold. The arm has been examined, the patient has responded, and the contours have been compared. The condition appears to belong on the side of attempted care. Linen and rigid supports wait nearby, but they are not yet the main tool. First comes the relation of the broken parts. The surviving text uses language commonly translated around placing or making the limb straight. That phrase is powerful because it describes an aim without pretending that the hidden fracture can be watched. The practitioner works from the outer line of the arm. Straightness is judged by what the eye and hand can detect. The exact forces, grips, and movements are not fully preserved, and this history should not become an instruction manual. The practical logic, however, is visible. A badly displaced limb left in the same relation may heal with shortening angulation or impaired function. Bringing it toward a more useful alignment gives the later repair a better starting point. The splint then protects that relationship from ordinary movement. This does not mean every ancient break was reduced, splinted, or successfully healed. The papyrus itself preserves only a narrow set of upper body cases. Archaeological samples come from particular cemeteries and periods, but the repeated sequence shows that alignment and external support were not random afterthoughts. They belong to an organized response to certain injuries. The emotional temperature of the room can now begin to fall. The uncertain diagnosis has become a bounded decision. The practitioner is no longer asking every possible question. The task has narrowed. The condition seems treatable. The next responsibility is concrete. Leave the limb in a straighter relation than the one in which it was found. There is quiet dignity in that narrowing. The patient is not promised a perfect arm. The practitioner is not granted supernatural certainty. Both face a smaller, workable objective. A hidden problem has been translated into an external task. A fourth checkpoint is complete. Observation has become prognosis, and prognosis has selected the path of action. In the next room of the story, Hands finally move toward the injured limb. The question waiting there is the second from our opening. What did making an arm straight actually mean when the broken ends remained invisible? Straight is an ordinary word carrying an extraordinary burden. It can describe the line of a reed, the edge of a wall, the course of a road, or the position of a limb. In the fracture cases, it marks a practical destination. The injured part has lost its expected relation. The practitioner tries to restore a relation that looks and feels nearer to normal. We can picture the task without reconstructing a modern technique. The patient is supported. An assistant may help keep the body steady. The practitioner watches the whole arm rather than staring only at the painful point. Shoulder, elbow, wrist, and hand belong to one connected line. The comparison side remains useful. If the position changes, the outer contour changes with it. The surviving wording has often been summarized as manipulating the fractured arm until it is straight. That summary should remain conceptual. It tells us the purpose, reduction, in the broad sense of bringing displaced parts toward alignment. It leaves many details outside the record. The missing details are important for safety today, but they are not necessary to understand the historical mechanism. What matters is the sequence of responsibility. Before the movement, the practitioner owns the position. During it, patient, assistant, and practitioner share the need for control. Afterward, the support must take over. If the arm immediately returns to the former angle, the work has not been handed onward. That transfer makes the scene familiar to anyone who has tried to hold two pieces in relation while fastening them. A joint of wood may sit perfectly while both hands press it together, then slip the instant one hand reaches for the clamp. A repaired pipe may align until its bracket is tightened. The temporary hold and the lasting support are different jobs. In the ancient Rome, the temporary hold belongs to human hands. The lasting support belongs to rigid material, padding, wrapping, and the patient's ability to protect the limb. The papyrus places those jobs close together because one without the other would be incomplete. The injured person's part should not disappear from this account. Stillness is not passive when movement hurts. The person must tolerate examination, allow the arm to be repositioned, and then live with the bulky support through ordinary hours of sitting, sleeping, eating, washing, and moving through a household. The splint may be the visible object, but cooperation and care give it time to work. The practitioner's concentration also has a clear boundary. Straightness judged from the outside can be useful without being perfect. Modern images reveal small rotations, hidden fragments, joint involvement, and internal gaps that no ancient eye could measure. The old method aimed at a serviceable outer relation, using the clues available in the room. This is where heel bones later become such interesting witnesses. A long bone united in good alignment suggests that its broken parts remained in a favorable relation during healing. It still cannot tell us whether a papyrus reader reduced it, a family member improvised support, the fracture happened to be stable, or the person protected it through instinct and rest. Alignment records an outcome, not a signature. For the moment, we remain before that outcome. The practitioner has completed the bounded task. The arm looks straighter. Movement is quieted. The patient's expression may soften simply because the limb is no longer being handled. Any relief we imagine belongs to that visible change, not to a biography we possess. Our second opening loop can close. Making the arms straight meant using the outside of the body to guide a better relation than refusing to rely on hands alone. The result had to be maintained. In that sense, alignment was not the end of treatment. It was a position waiting for a structure. The hands now withdraw one at a time. A strip of linen is lifted. A rigid support is placed near the arm. The next checkpoint belongs to materials, not as a list of ancient curiosities, but as a small mechanical system designed to hold, cushion, and endure. A splint begins with a simple contrast. Bone and joint must be protected from disruptive motion, while skin and soft tissue must be protected from the splint. Rigid material provides resistance. Softer material spreads pressure. Wrapping keeps the pieces in relation. None of those parts is especially impressive alone. Together they become a system. Ancient Egyptian splinting is often described with wood, bark, linen, grass, plant fibers and padding. Some later histories add grease, honey, resin, clay, or other compounds, sometimes blending wound treatment, bandage stiffening, and fracture care into one universal recipe. The surviving evidence is more interesting when the layers stay separate. Wooden or bark-like supports are well associated with Egyptian splinting finds and historical discussion. Linen is an obvious wrapping material in a society that produced it at great scale. Grass or other plant matter could sit between rigid support and body, adding bulk and cushioning. These elements produce a plausible mechanical arrangement without requiring the bandage to become a hard modern cast. The papyrus brings a special puzzle. In the surviving arrangement around the clavicle in humorous cases, scholars have noted that an instruction involving splints may sit awkwardly, as though part of one case has wandered into the next. One reconstruction places reduction with the clavicle material and the splints with the following arm fracture passage. The textual problem is not a reason to abandon the evidence. It is a reason to avoid reciting one seamless protocol as though every line had arrived in perfect order. There is a certain dry humor in an instruction wandering down the page after 3,500 years. Anyone who has inherited a box of workshop notes will understand the feeling. The measurements are clear, the drawing is useful, and one crucial sentence seems to belong to the page before it. The knowledge is still there. It simply asks the reader to handle it with care. The material logic remains visible. A support should be rigid enough to resist bending. It should be placed so that pressure is not concentrated on one small point. Padding should protect prominent areas. Wrapping should hold the arrangement without becoming its own source of injury. Those principles sound modern because mechanics has not changed, but the ancient objects were not fiberglass casts, and their use should not be translated into present-day technique. The feel of the room changes as the support is assembled. Linen makes a faint, dry whisper when folded. Plant padding has an uneven surface. A thin piece of wood carries grain beneath the fingers. The assistant can hold one layer while the practitioner places another. The patient's task is stillness, now with the promise that the handling will soon stop. This is a good place to notice how quiet competence often looks. It rarely arrives as one dramatic gesture. It appears as a sequence of small checks. Is the arm still in the intended relation? Is a hard edge pressing where it should not? Has the wrapping shifted the support? Can the whole arrangement remain stable when the hands let go? The papyrus tells us far less about follow-up than a modern clinician would want. Archaeology adds objects but not daily schedules. We should imagine no universal calendar and no guaranteed outcome. Yet the support itself implies duration. It was made to remain after the treatment room emptied. That duration gives the splint its deeper role. It extends the practitioner's judgment through time. The hand that aligned the limb is present only for minutes. The support repeats the same quiet instruction for days. Keep this relation, limit this movement, give the body a stable interval in which to work. Our material checkpoint is complete. We can speak confidently of external support using rigid plant material, linen, and padding, in particular Egyptian evidence. We can speak cautiously about the precise arrangement of the surviving text. We can attach compounds only to the case or source that actually names them. The third opening loop is nearly ready to close, but written materials are not enough. We need a physical splint, found in the ground with its wrapping and injured limb. For that, the story travels south of Cairo to Naga-ed-Der, where an early 20th century excavation uncovered two ancient burials that would be repeated in histories of fracture care for generations. In 1903, members of the Hearst expedition were working at Naga-ed-Der when they encountered two burials in the same tomb with splinted fractures. One involved a femur, the other involved the forearm. The finds were later published in 1908, entering a chain of retellings that still shapes popular accounts of ancient orthopedics. The attraction is easy to understand. A papyrus is an instruction. A healed bone is an outcome. A splint still associated with an injured limb seems to stand between them as the missing object. It offers rigid supports, wrapping, padding, and placement in one tangible arrangement. Descriptions of the finds refer to wood or bark-like elements, linen and grass or other plant material. These are ordinary substances used with a clear purpose. Their ordinariness is part of their power. The object is not an exotic device requiring a lost technology. It is a thoughtful combination of what was available. Yet the Naga-ed-Der finds are one archaeological cluster, not a national standard. Later histories often cite one another while returning to the same early report. 10 repetitions can sound like 10 discoveries when they are really 10 branches growing from one root. Good research follows the branches back to the root. Provenance matters too. The date of the burial, the location of the object, the condition of the remains, and the observations made during excavation all shape what the splint can support. An object found attached to a broken limb carries a different meaning from loose wood placed near a body. A support applied in life carries a different meaning from one added during mummification or burial to hold a body in position. Ancient remains include examples where supports appear funerary rather than clinical. Mummification, transport, robbery, desiccation, excavation, and later handling can all change the relation of body parts. This is why the physical object must be read with the same patience as the papyrus. Context is the wrapping around the wrapping. For a listener, the most useful picture is modest. Imagine several slim, rigid pieces arranged along an injured limb, softened by plant material and secured with cloth. The design does not need to resemble a modern hospital cast to make mechanical sense. It only needs to reduce unwanted motion enough for the body to have a better chance at bridging the break. That phrase, a better chance, is worth keeping. The splint could not clean an infected open wound with modern methods. It could not reveal a hidden fragment. It could not monitor circulation with instruments or check internal alignments on an image. Its task was narrower, external stability. Narrow tasks are often the ones that survive. A simple wooden brace can be repaired, replaced, or adjusted. Linen can be rewound. Padding can be added where pressure becomes uncomfortable. These possibilities are logical consequences of the materials, though the Naga-ed-Der burials do not give us a day-by-day care diary. Our third opening question can now receive its full local answer. What did an ancient Egyptian splint look and feel like? In these bounded finds and related descriptions, it was a layered object, rigid plant or wooden elements outside, softer grass or padding nearer the body, and linen holding the assembly together. It was light enough to be made from local materials and strong enough to resist some movement. The answer is satisfying because it is physical. You can almost feel the linen edge and the uneven padding beneath it. But the object also creates a better question. A splint is only outside the body. Why should stillness outside change what happens deep inside a broken bone? The excavators could document the support. Modern biology can explain the repair. We will cross that bridge carefully, keeping modern knowledge in its proper place, not as proof of what ancient practitioners believed, but as an explanation of why their mechanical aim could matter. Inside the supported limb, repair begins in disorder. Blood vessels damaged by the break release blood around the fractured ends. A hematoma forms. In ordinary language, it is a collection of blood, but biologically, it becomes part of the first environment in which repair is organized. Inflammatory cells arrive. Signals move through the injured tissue. New blood vessels begin to grow. Fibrous tissue and cartilage help create a soft bridge between the fragments. This early callus is not yet mature bone. It is a temporary structure, more flexible and more vulnerable, building continuity where continuity was lost. With time, parts of that soft callus mineralize. Woven bone appears. A harder callus bridges the break more firmly. Later still, remodeling changes the shape and internal arrangement of the repaired area. Bone is removed where it is no longer needed and strengthened where loads demanded. The process can continue for months or years after initial union. These stages overlap. Real bodies do not change chapters on a fixed schedule. Age, health, blood supply, infection, fracture pattern, soft tissue injury, nutrition, and mechanical conditions all influence the course. The four familiar labels, hematoma and inflammation, soft callus, hard callus, and remodeling, are a map of a moving landscape. The splint matters because movement affects that landscape. Too much disruptive motion can repeatedly disturb the fragile bridge. Appropriate stability allows tissue to form and mature. At the same time, modern fracture science distinguishes several kinds of stability and healing, far beyond anything we should project onto an ancient support. The historical point remains simple. Limiting unwanted movement gives biological repair a quieter mechanical environment. Think of a crack being joined while the material is still soft. If the two sides are pulled apart again and again, the bridge struggles to persist. If they remain close enough and steady enough, the bridge can thicken. Bone is not glue, of course. It is living tissue with cells, blood supply, and the remarkable ability to rebuild structure rather than merely seal the area with an inert patch. That regenerative quality helps explain why imperfect ancient care could still produce impressive healing. A reduction did not need to be radiographically perfect for callus to fall. A stable fracture might unite with rest and support. A displaced fracture might unite at an angle. A severe injury might fail to unite, or unite incompletely, leaving shortening and altered function. The body worked with the mechanical starting point it received. The callus becomes a kind of slow record. A smooth, remodeled swelling can show that a person lived long after injury. An irregular bridge can show repair under difficult conditions. A gap may suggest non-union. Angulation can preserve the relation in which the bone healed. Infection may leave its own changes. None of these traces speaks in complete sentences, but each adds a line to the story. This is why modern researchers can study fracture outcomes in ancient skeletal collections. They are not watching the treatment. They are reading the architecture left by repair. The splint is long gone in most cases. Soft tissue has disappeared. Names and complaints are lost. Yet union, deformity, shortening, and callus can remain. The AIDS checkpoint, therefore, turns the story inward. The practitioner's aim was external and immediate. Improve relation, reduce motion, protect the limb. The body's work was internal and slow. Organize a hematoma, build a soft bridge, mineralize it, and remodel the result. Responsibility has passed again. The practitioner has left the room. The linen has become familiar against the skin. Night follows day. The support does nothing dramatic, which is precisely its virtue. It holds while living tissue changes. Now we can ask the fourth opening question with better precision. Instead of asking vaguely whether ancient Egyptian fracture care worked, we can look for a measurable outcome in a named sample. Did broken long bones unite? Did they remain badly angled, or did many return to good alignment? At Giza, researchers counted enough bones to turn that question from anecdote into a bounded pattern. At Giza, a study of Old Kingdom skeletal remains counted 2,287 observable long bones from 204 adults. Within that bounded collection, researchers identified 45 fractures, a frequency of just under 2% among the examined long bones. The denominator is as important as the fracture count. It keeps the result attached to the material that was actually available. Most of those fractures had united in good alignment. Only 3 were described as misaligned. That pattern is striking. It suggests that many injured limbs remained in a favorable relation long enough for bone repair to bridge them. The word suggests is doing useful work. Good alignment is consistent with effective stabilization, whether through deliberate splinting, a naturally stable fracture, careful rest, family support, or some combination. The skeleton records the position of union. It carries no label naming the practitioner, the bandage, or the page of a papyrus. This distinction keeps the result strong. We do not need the bones to prove every detail of the text. Their value lies elsewhere. They show that in one substantial Old Kingdom sample, broken long bones often healed and usually did so without severe visible angulation. If you have ever looked at a repair after the clamps are removed, you know why the final line matters. The glue bottle and the instructions can tell you how a joint was intended to work. The finished joint shows whether alignment survived the waiting period. These are different records of the same broad problem. At Giza, the researchers used visual examination and radiography to assess the bones. They could inspect callus, deformity, and union more closely than an ancient practitioner examining a living arm. Yet even modern examination works with a partial archive. Some bones do not survive, some skeletons are incomplete, and soft tissue injuries vanish. People who died before healing could leave a different trace from those who lived for years afterward. The sample also belongs to a place and time. It is not a percentage for every Egyptian community across 3,000 years. Its strength comes from being named, a particular cemetery collection, a particular set of observable long bones, and a particular method of recording fractures. Within that frame, the result answers our fourth opening question. Did ancient bones actually heal? Yes, many did. In this Giza sample, most observed long bone fractures united in good alignment. That outcome fits the mechanical logic of reduction and external support, while remaining open about the exact care received by each person. This is the main payoff of the journey, and it is more interesting than a simple claim of ancient medical success. It joins three independent witnesses without forcing them into one event. The papyrus shows an organized way to examine, judge, align, and support certain injuries. The Naga-ed-Der finds show that layered external splints existed. The Giza bones show frequent union in good alignment within a defined skeletal sample. Each witness fills a different space. The text gives intention, the splint gives material form, and the healed bone gives outcome. Where they overlap, a plausible system appears. Visible clues guide a decision. Hands improve relation. External materials preserve stillness. Living tissue bridges the break. The system remains human in scale. It depends on someone noticing the deformity, someone willing to make a restrained judgment, someone preparing linen and supports, and someone helping the injured person through the quiet inconvenience of recovery. Good alignment is not only a property of bone. It is the long result of many ordinary hours in which the limb was protected. Our questions can now become softer. We no longer need to wonder whether repair was possible. The large sample shows that union and good alignment occurred. What remains is the texture of survival. A well-aligned bone can make care look clean and complete. An individual skeleton, healed but altered, reminds us that living through a fracture and returning to perfect form are not the same achievement. For that more personal scale, we travel south to Tumos in ancient Nubia, where the bones of an older woman preserved several healed injuries and the marks of a long, imperfect recovery. At Tumos, archaeologists studied the skeleton of an adult woman who had lived roughly 3,000 years ago. Her right femur carried a healed fracture near the hip. Her left upper arm and ribs also showed healed injuries. The femur had united with deformity, shortening, and signs of altered loading. The repair was real, but it was not anatomically neat. The woman was around her late 50s by the study's estimate. Her bones show that she lived long enough after these injuries for substantial healing. They also show the price of imperfect union. The right femur was shorter than the left, and the healed region preserved a changed angle. Mild atrophy suggested that the limb had been used differently. No surviving record tells us how the injury happened. The fractures may have occurred together or at different times. We have no treatment note, no name for a caregiver, and no wrapped splint from the moment of injury. The useful conclusion lies in what the body requires. A severe hip area fracture in an older adult creates long periods of limited movement and dependence. Survival points towards sustained support in daily life, even when the exact arrangement remains lost. Care in this sense is larger than a procedure. Someone brings water, adjusts a resting place, and makes sure food arrives. The body must be kept warm, clean, and protected through days when ordinary movement becomes difficult. Those tasks are reasonable consequences of the injury, though we should not turn them into a documented domestic scene for this particular woman. Her skeleton changes the emotional meaning of healing. In the Giza sample, union in good alignment feels like a clean local payoff. At Tomos, union and deformity occupy the same bone. The person survived. The fracture healed. The limb also carried lasting change. This is common to repair in every age. Success is rarely one switch moving from broken to perfect. A wall can stand after a crack is stabilized while still bearing the seam. A tree can grow around a wound and carry a changed shape for decades. Bone can unite, remodel, and support life while preserving the geometry of the injury. Other archaeological cases make the same lesson from different angles. A healed bone may show abundant callus. A fracture may unite at a severe angle. Infection can leave roughened changes. A suspected amputation may prove, under closer imaging, to have another explanation. Each case rewards careful description before a dramatic label. The Tammuz woman also returns us to the people in our representative opening. We did not give the injured person a name or an ending. That restraint now pays off. One ancient skeleton cannot become the patient from one ancient text, and neither can become the model for every fracture. Their connection is mechanical and human, not biographical. The papyrus describes decisions around treatable and hopeless injury. The splint shows external control. The healed skeleton shows what time can leave behind. Between those points lies a world of ordinary care that archaeology can sense more easily than it can narrate. By now, the pressure of the opening is eased. The arm in our lamplit room is supported. The Giza sample has supplied the main pattern. The Tammuz skeleton has restored complexity without taking the payoff away. Ancient fracture care could help create the conditions for union, while biology, injury severity, and alignment shaped the result. One final practical question remains. The title began with the absence of X-rays. When radiography arrived in the late 19th century, what changed? And when modern researchers place ancient remains beneath X-ray beams and CT scanners, which old uncertainties become clearer, and which remain patiently out of reach? In 1895, Wilhelm Röntgen's work introduced a new way to see internal structure without opening the body. Fracture care changed because alignment, displacement, and healing could now be examined as images rather than inferred only from the surface. The shift was profound, but it did not make the older skills meaningless. A practitioner still asks how the injury happened. Shape, pain, movement, skin condition, and the state of the person still matter. Imaging adds an internal witness. It does not replace the need to interpret the whole case. For ancient remains, radiography and CT opened another kind of room. Researchers could examine wrapped mummies, fragmented bones, and healed callus while preserving much of the material intact. Internal density, fracture lines, remodeling, and the relation of fragments became easier to distinguish. Modern imaging also revealed how often a visible break belongs to the history after death. Bone can fracture during mummification, desiccation, tomb robbery, transport, excavation, storage, or handling. In tomb KV31, researchers reassembled scattered remains and used radiography while sorting which apparent injuries occurred during life and which were post-mortem damage. Matching body parts even changed estimates of how many people were present. This is taphonomy in practical form, the study of what happened to remains from death through discovery. The term may sound technical, but the question is ordinary. When did this damage occur? Crack made after burial tells a different story from a fracture that developed callus during life. Callus is one of the clearest clues because it requires a living response. Bone edges rounded by remodeling, a bridge of new tissue, and changes in internal structure show that time passed after injury. A dry breakthrough old bone lacks that same biological reply. Imaging helps researchers see the difference, especially where outer surfaces are confusing. CT adds slices through the body and can separate structures that overlap on a plain radiograph. Studies of Egyptian mummies have used it to investigate trauma, disease, preservation, and funerary alteration. One systematic review gathered published CT examinations of 189 mummies and found traumatic fractures in a limited number, while causes of death remain difficult to establish in most cases. Another recent project examined 45 whole-body CT scans for tumors rather than fracture treatment, a reminder that the same technology can ask many different questions of old remains. The improved image still requires disciplined scope. A healed fracture may show alignment and survival. It rarely names the event that caused it. A post-mortem break may show burial damage. It says nothing about pain in life. A mummy support may hold a limb in place, yet context must decide whether it was clinical or funerary. This closes the fifth opening loop. X-rays and CT made the internal relation of old bones visible. They help distinguish union from non-union, callus from later breakage, and some injuries in life from damage after death. They also sharpen the humility of the story. Better visibility gives better questions, not a complete return of lost experience. The ancient practitioner and the modern radiologist therefore share one habit across a vast distance: neither image nor touch interprets itself. The practitioner compared outward clues. The modern team compares images, preservation history, anatomy, excavation records, and material context. Tools change. Judgment remains. Our 11 checkpoints are now complete. The body supplied signs, and the papyrus organized them. Prognosis bounded action, while hands sought alignment. Wood, padding, and linen held that relation as living tissue made callus. Skeletal samples preserved outcomes, and modern imaging separated some injuries from the long damage of burial. We can return at last to the Lamplight room and place the three main witnesses side by side: a line of ancient writing, a layered external splint, and a healed bone. Together they can pay the title in full. The injured arm rests where we left it. Linen crosses the outer supports. Padding softens their edges. The lamp is lower now, and the people in the room have grown quiet. How did ancient Egyptians set broken bones without X-rays? The strongest answer is not one lost trick. It is a chain of practical judgments made from the outside of the body. The practitioner looked for a pattern in shape, movement, pain, touch, and response. The injury was sorted by what seemed possible: treat it, contend with it, or withhold an attempt. For a suitable upper limb fracture, the arm could be brought toward a straighter relation. Rigid supports, softened by plant material and held with linen, could limit unwanted movement after the hands withdrew. Then the body carried out the invisible repair through callus and remodeling. The system worked by dividing one impossible task into smaller possible ones. No one in the room could watch the broken ends join. They could improve the starting position. They could protect it. They could observe the person over time. They could adjust ordinary care around the injured limb. The rest belonged to living tissue. Archaeology preserves this chain in separate pieces. The Edwin Smith Papyrus gives the repeated movement from examination to judgment and treatment. The splints at Naga-ed-Der give physical form to external support. The Giza sample shows many long bone fractures united in good alignment. The Tomb Wars woman shows survival with lasting deformity. X-rays and CT reveal callus and help separate injuries in life from damage after burial. No single one of those witnesses could carry the whole claim. Together they reveal a durable way of thinking. Observe before acting, align what can be aligned, support what must remain still, and judge the result with patience. That changed belief reaches beyond ancient medicine. We often imagine that progress begins when a new machine makes a hidden problem visible. Sometimes it does. X-rays transformed fracture diagnosis. Yet people had been making useful decisions at the boundary of visibility for thousands of years. Their success depended on respecting the clues they had and the limits they faced. The ancient splint was therefore more than wood tied to an arm. It was the final handoff in a sequence. The text handed a pattern to the practitioner. The patient handed over an injured limb. The practitioner handed alignment to the support. The support handed stillness to time. Time handed the result back in the shape of healed bone. Some results were straight, while others were shortened, angled, or beyond help. The record carries no reason to turn the past into a miracle. Its quieter achievement is enough. Careful observation and modest materials could create conditions in which a broken human body sometimes repaired itself remarkably well. The linen in our room will remain for a while. It may be loosened, rewound, or padded as ordinary care requires, though the surviving sources do not give this representative patient a schedule. The person's task is now smaller. Protect the arm. Let the hours pass. Allow the weight of responsibility to move away from conscious effort. The practitioner can set the remaining strips aside. The wooden pieces no longer need to be held. Nothing inside the limb is visible, and nothing visible needs to happen quickly. Beneath the wrapping, blood has already begun to organize the first repair. A soft bridge will form. A harder one may follow. Long after the room is forgotten, bone may still carry the shape of these quiet weeks. If you have drifted in and out, the whole journey can rest in one simple image. Warm lamplight falls on a supported arm, while the body continues work no ancient eye could see. The room grows still. The questions have been handed onward. The linen holds. The night can continue without us.